The signal came in at the edge of Korun space, and the watchman who caught it did not believe it at first. His name was Veller. He sat in a dark room full of light. The lights were stars, and the stars were not his to keep. He worked for the throne. Everyone worked for the throne. The throne had ruled 40,000 worlds for so long that no living thing remembered a time before it. The throne was old. The throne was tired. The throne did not like surprises. Veller was about to give it one. He leaned forward, the signal blinked. A small ship far out where no ships went. A scout, not a Korun scout, something new. He tapped the panel with one long gray finger. The ship had a shape he had never seen. Ugly, square in places it should have been round, like someone had built it angry. There were marks on the hull, letters maybe, a language no archive held. Veller opened the records, he searched again. Nothing. In 40,000 worlds, in 10 million years of the throne's memory, there was nothing that matched. No race, no banner, no claim. This was not how the galaxy worked. The galaxy was full. Every star had a master. Every people had a place. New things did not simply appear at the edge of space wearing strange letters and pointing the wrong way. He should report it. He knew he should report it. But a part of him, the small, soft part that every watchman buries under years of dull work, whispered that if he reported it, it would become real. And if it became real, it would become his problem. The little ship turned, slow, careful, like it was looking at him too. Veller reported it. The report went up. It went to his captain, and his captain sent it higher, and higher still, until it reached a room with no windows where the voices of the throne sat in a ring and decided the fate of worlds. There were 9 voices. They were the oldest minds of the oldest races, joined to the throne, fed by it, owned by it. They did not have names anymore. They had only purposes. The first voice spoke for war. The second spoke for trade. The third for fear, and so on down the ring. The first voice looked at the image of the little ugly ship. A scout, it said, its voice was flat. Send a fleet, take it, find where it came from, burn that place. We do not allow new things. This was the way of the throne. It had always worked. A new race rose every few thousand years on some wet rock far from the center. The throne let them grow just enough to be interesting. Then it took them, made them servants or made them ash depending on its mood. There was no war in this. There was only correction, a weed pulled before it could seed. So the fleet went. It was not a large fleet. The throne did not waste large fleets on weeds. 12 ships, each one a city of metal, each one armed with weapons that could crack a world's crust and let the fire out. The crews aboard them were proud, in the dull way of soldiers who have never lost. They had been told they were going to correct a weed. They followed the little scout's trail back through the dark. The trail was strange. It bent. It doubled. It went the long way, around dead stars, through dust, as if the maker of it did not want to be followed and knew exactly how following worked. The fleet's navigators frowned at it but did not worry. A clever weed was still a weed. At the end of the trail was a single yellow star. Around the yellow star was a single blue world. The fleet stopped at the edge of the system and looked at the blue world, and the commander of the fleet, an old soldier named Drevis, felt the first cold finger of doubt touch the back of his neck. The world was loud. Not loud with weapons, loud with talk. The air around it crackled with signals, with voices, with 10,000 kinds of noise pouring up off the surface and out into space in every direction. The fleet's listeners caught fragments, music, arguments, numbers, pictures that moved, stories told in 100 tongues. This was not a quiet little weed world that did not know the galaxy was watching. This was a world that was shouting at the dark on purpose. "Scan it," Drevis said. They scanned it. The numbers came back, and the room got very quiet. The world was small, the race was young. By the throne's measure, they had only just learned to leave their own air. They had a few dozen tiny stations near their world, a handful of small colonies on the dead rock that circled it, nothing more. No empire, no fleet to speak of. A few thousand armed ships at most, and most of those were small, the kind a single family might fly. By every measure the throne used, this race was nothing. A weed indeed, younger and weaker than most. Drevis should have been relieved. He was not. Because the scans showed something else under the numbers. The world was covered in the marks of war. Old wars, recent wars, wars upon wars, layer over layer going back as far as the scanners could read. This little race had been fighting since before it could speak, fighting itself, fighting its own world, fighting and learning and fighting again. And the weapons were the strange part. Most young races built one kind of weapon, the kind their world's chemistry made easy, and they stopped there until the throne came. This race had built everything: fire, poison, disease, things that split the smallest pieces of matter and let out the sun's own heart, things that could end their whole world 10 times over. They had built all of it. And they had not used it on each other, not all the way. They had come right up to the edge, again and again, looked over and stepped back, held the means to die in their own hands for generations and chosen, each time by the thinnest margin, to live. Drevis did not understand what he was looking at, but something in him, the old soldier's part, the part that had kept him alive through 100 corrections, told him this was not a weed. This was something that had spent its whole short life learning one thing, better than any race the throne had ever pulled: how to survive. "Commander," said his second, "orders." Drevis looked at the blue world. He thought about the order he had been given: take the scout, burn the place it came from, simple, clean, the way it had always been. "We approach," he said, "slowly. We open a channel first. We talk before we burn." His second stared at him. "We do not talk to weeds." "We talk to this one," Drevis said. He did not know why he said it. Later, when he had time to think, he would decide it was the noise. A weed did not shout at the dark. A weed hid and hoped. This thing wanted to be heard. So Drevis, against the way of 10 million years, opened a channel to the blue world. And the blue world answered before the channel was fully open. The voice that came back was calm, friendly even. It spoke in the trade tongue of the galaxy, the common speech that the throne had spread across the worlds, which meant they had been listening, had caught the signals leaking from the throne's own edges, had taught themselves the words of a power they had never met. "Hello," the voice said. "We see you. Welcome. We've been wondering when someone would come." Drevis felt the cold finger press harder. "You knew we were coming," he said. "We hoped someone would," the voice said. "It gets lonely out here. We've been calling for a long time. You're the first to call back." There was no fear in the voice. There was no challenge in it either. It was the voice of someone opening a door to a stranger, curious, a little glad, completely unafraid. Drevis had corrected 40 worlds in his long life. He had heard 40 different kinds of fear: the proud kind, the begging kind, the silent kind. He knew fear the way a fisher knows water. He heard none of it. "You should be afraid," Drevis said. He did not mean it as a threat. He meant it as a true thing, almost a warning, almost a kindness. "We are the fleet of the throne. We have come to correct you. You are small. You have no army that could stand against even one of my ships. By the time your world finishes this conversation, it could already be over." There was a pause on the line. Then the voice laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a surprised one. The laugh of someone who has just realized the stranger at the door has badly misread the house. "Oh," the voice said. "Oh no, you think this is the army." Drevis said nothing. "Commander," the voice went on, gentle now, the way you speak to someone who is about to walk off a cliff they cannot see. "What you're looking at down here, all of this, the ships, the stations, the colonies, the few thousand armed crews you counted, I'm sure you counted them, you seem thorough. That's not an army. That's not even close. That's what we keep at home. That's the people who didn't want to leave. The room around Drevis had gone cold and still. This is a backwater, the voice said. A nice one, we like it here. But the ones who go out, the ones who actually fight, they don't stay home. They haven't been home in a long time. We sent them out into the dark a long while ago, looking for exactly the kind of door you just opened. And here's the funny part, Commander. The voice paused. They're already past you. Drevis's second made a sound, a small choked sound. You followed our scout in a straight line, the voice said, almost kindly. Well, as straight as it let you. You came right to the front door and knocked. You never once looked behind you. Why would you? You came to correct a weed. On the fleet's great screens, the empty dark behind the 12 ships of the throne was still empty. For now, we didn't send our real army to meet you, the voice said. We sent it to meet whoever sent you. We've had its heading for some time. We're rather good at headings. It's about the only thing this world has ever truly mastered, where to point the thing that ends people, and when. Drevis stared at the blue world. The shouting, fearless, war-scarred little blue world that had built every weapon a mind could imagine and used none of them on itself, that had spent its whole brief life learning to survive against impossible odds, that had taught itself the speech of a power it had never met just so it could one day say exactly this. You're bluffing, Drevis said. His voice did not sound sure even to himself. Maybe, the voice said. You came a long way to find out. It would be a shame to leave without knowing. And 40,000 light years away, in a room with no windows, the third voice of the throne, the voice of fear, sat up straight for the first time in 1,000 years. Because something was approaching the center of everything. And it was not slowing down. The room with no windows had not changed in 10,000 years. It did not change now, but the things inside it did. The 9 voices of the throne sat in their ring. They had sat in that ring through the fall of stars, through the slow death of races, through wars so old that their names had rotted out of memory. They did not move much. They did not need to. The throne moved for them. The throne reached across 40,000 worlds and did their will, and they sat in the dark and decided. Now the third voice spoke, and its voice shook. Something is coming, it said, from the edge from where the fleet went. The fleet sends word, the first voice asked. The first voice was war. It was not worried. It had never had reason to worry. No, said the third. The fleet sends nothing. The fleet has gone quiet. A pause moved around the ring. Quiet how? The first voice asked. Gone, the third said. 12 ships. They opened a channel to the weed world. They talked, and then they stopped. All 12 at once. No distress, no fight, no flash of weapons. They were there and then they were not, the way a candle is there and then is not. The first voice considered this. It had lost ships before. War cost ships. This was nothing. Send more, it said. There is no more to send to them, the third said. Listen to me. Listen. The thing that took them is not at the weed world. The thing that took them is coming here, toward the center, toward us, and it is moving faster than anything has a right to move. The second voice, the voice of trade who measured all things in cost and gain, leaned into the dark. How fast, it said. The third voice told them. The room with no windows was silent. In a way, it had never been silent. Because the number was not possible. Nothing crossed the deep dark that fast. The throne's own ships, the fastest in all the worlds, took years to span the empire. The thing the third voice was tracking would cross that same distance in days. It had already crossed most of it. It had been moving while the fleet was still listening to the weed world's friendly little voice. It had been moving, perhaps, since long before the fleet ever set out. What is it? The first voice said, and for the first time in 10,000 years it was not giving an order. It was asking. I do not know, the third voice said. It does not match anything. It is not one ship. It is not a fleet. It is between. It is many small things moving as one large thing. Thousands, tens of thousands. spread wide, layered deep, each one too small to be a thread alone, all of them together too large to be anything but the end of something. The weed world said it had sent its army out, the fourth voice murmured. The fourth was the voice of memory. It remembered everything, even the things the others wished it would forget. The fleet's last words before they went quiet. The weed world said its real army was already past them, already on its way to whoever sent the fleet. The ring went still again. Whoever sent the fleet. That was them. That was the throne. The fleet had been sent by the first voice, on the order of the ring, in the name of the throne, from this room with no windows at the center of everything. The weed world had not aimed its army at the fleet. It had aimed it here. That cannot be, the first voice said. They did not know where we are. No one knows where we are. The center is hidden. It has been hidden since before your memory, fourth, and your memory is the oldest thing alive. They asked the fleet to talk before it burned them, the fourth voice said softly. And the fleet talked. And while it talked, the weed world listened. Not to the words, to the signal, to where the signal came from, to the path it traveled. They followed the order back up the chain the way you follow a thread back to the spool. They did not need to know where we are. They only needed us to speak to them once. The first voice did not answer. It opened a channel, the fourth voice went on, and now there was something almost like wonder in it. Your good commander, Drevis. He did a kind thing, a strange thing, a thing the throne has never done. He talked to a weed before burning it, and in doing so he drew a line from the weed's front door straight back to this room. They have been climbing that line ever since. They are almost here. Across the empire, the throne began to wake. It had been a long time since the throne had truly woken. It did not need to. The worlds obeyed. The fleets patrolled. The corrections happened on schedule. The throne could sleep through all of it, a great slow mind dreaming its great slow dream of order without end. Now it woke, and the waking ran out across 40,000 worlds like a shudder. On 100 worlds at once, war fleets that had sat idle for centuries lit their engines. On 1,000 worlds, the servant traces who tended the throne's machines felt the floor tremble and looked up in fear. In the deep places where the throne kept the weapons it had taken from 100 murdered races, old terrors stirred and were aimed outward, into the dark, toward the thing that was coming. The throne had never been attacked. In 10 million years, no one had ever come for the center. The center was the safe place. The center was the still point. The center was where the deciding happened, far from any danger, untouched, untouchable. The throne did not know how to be attacked. It had forgotten, if it ever knew, that being feared and being safe are not the same thing. It learned the difference quickly. The first of the small things arrived at the outer ring of the center's defenses, and the defenses, the great old guns that had not fired in living memory, swung to meet it. The small thing was not a ship. The defenses had been built to kill ships. This was smaller, a sliver of metal no longer than a body, carrying nothing but engine and one cold purpose. It did not dodge. It did not fight. It came straight on, and the guns fired and they hit it, and it did not matter because behind it were 1,000 more exactly like it, and behind those 1,000 more. The center had built its defenses to stop an empire. To stop ships the size of cities, fleets the size of nations, the kind of enemy the throne could imagine. It had not built its defenses to stop a swarm. It had never imagined a swarm. Why would anyone build 10,000 tiny dying things and throw them all at once into the teeth of the guns? It was wasteful. It was crude. It was the act of a race that did not value the lives of its own machines, that built death cheap and threw it by the fistful, that had learned in the mud of its own endless wars that you do not need one perfect spear when you have 10,000 cheap ones and a reason to throw them all. The guns fired until they grew hot. They killed thousands. They could not kill enough. The swarm was not a thing you killed. It was a thing you survived or did not, and the center had never learned how to survive anything because nothing had ever threatened it. The small things slipped through. Not all. Not most. But enough. Enough slivercraft got past the great old guns and into the soft space behind them, where the worlds of the center sat fat and unguarded, never having needed guarding. And in the room with no windows, the third voice, the voice of fear, began to do the thing it had been built to do and had never truly done. It panicked. "Pull the fleets back," it said. "All of them, from every world, bring them here, bring everything here." "If we pull the fleets," the second voice said, "the worlds revolt. 40,000 worlds obey us because the fleets are there. Take the fleets away and the empire comes apart in a season." "The empire is already coming apart," the third voice screamed, and the sound of a voice screaming had never been heard in that room, and the others recoiled from it. "Look, look, they are inside the wall. We have no wall anymore. There is no center anymore. There is only us and them, and they are almost in the room." The first voice, the voice of war who had ordered the fleet sent, who had called the blue world a weed, spoke at last. And its voice was different now. Smaller. "What do they want?" it said. It was a strange question for the voice of war to ask. War did not ask what enemies wanted. War only asked how to break them. But the first voice asked it because it had begun to understand, slowly, the way an old mind understands a new thing, that it did not know how to break this enemy. That this enemy might not break. That this enemy had spent its whole short, violent life learning the one art the throne had never had to learn, the art of the desperate, the art of the cornered, the art of throwing everything you have at the thing that means to end you and not stopping until one of you is gone. And far out in the dark, riding behind the swarm, came the answer. A signal. The same calm, friendly, fearless voice that had spoken to Drevis at the Blue World. It reached into the room with no windows, into the center of everything, into the ears of the 9 voices who had decided the fate of 40,000 worlds, and had never once imagined their own. "Hello," the voice said. "We see you too now. We've been wanting to meet you for a very long time." The 9 voices listened. They could not help it. There was nothing else to do. "You sent 12 ships to correct us," the voice said. "We've corrected them instead. They're fine, by the way. Your commander Drevis is fine. He talked to us instead of burning us, and that turned out to be the smartest thing anyone in your whole empire has done in 10 million years. We don't kill people who talk." The voice paused. "We kill people who don't," it said. "And you've never once talked to anyone. You've only ever decided. We know. We followed the line back. We've seen what's at the end of it. We've seen this room. We know you're listening. So here's what's going to happen next, and I want you to understand that we're telling you because we'd genuinely rather you choose the easy way." The swarm filled the dark around the center now, a cloud of small, cheap deaths beyond counting, and behind the swarm, just arriving, the real thing, the thing the swarm had cleared the way for, slid out of the deep dark and into the light of the center's many suns. And the 9 voices of the throne saw the real army of the Blue World for the first time. And the third voice stopped screaming, because there are some things too large to scream at. It was not what they expected. That was the first thing the 9 voices understood, and the understanding hurt. They had expected ships of war, great gray cities of metal like their own, bristling with guns, built to crush. That was what an army looked like. That was what an army had always looked like, in every memory the fourth voice held. This was not that. The real army of the Blue World was made of every kind of thing. There were warships, yes, ugly and square and angry, the same shape as the little scout that had started all of this. But around them, between them, ahead of them came everything else. Ships that carried other ships. Ships that built ships, machines that ate metal at one end and made weapons at the other, so that the army did not need to bring all it would use, it only needed to bring the means to make more. Ships that grew food. Ships that held thousands of the Blue World's people, whole families, the young and the old, because this was not a fleet sent out to fight a battle and come home. This was a people on the move. This was the Blue World's children who had gone into the dark long ago, looking for a door, carrying everything they would need to never come back, and now they had found the door, and they had brought their whole lives through it. They are not soldiers, the second voice said slowly. They are settlers, they are colonists, they have come to stay. They are both, the fourth voice said. That is the thing you do not understand, that none of us understand because we have never lived the way they have lived. To them there is no line between the soldier and the settler. The same hand that plants the field holds the weapon over the field. They learned it in their own mud, on their own world, fighting each other for 10,000 years over the same small patches of ground. They learned that the only land you keep is the land you can hold, and the only thing worth holding it for is the life you build on it. They do not send armies. They send themselves, all of themselves, and they do not stop. The first voice, the voice of war, watched the army come, and felt something it had no name for because it had never needed one. It was watching a thing that would not break. The throne's wars had always worked the same way. You broke the enemy's army, and the enemy's people surrendered because the people were not the army, the people were behind the army, and once the army fell, the people had nothing left to fight with. That was war. That was how war had worked for 10 million years. But here the people were the army. There was no behind. There was no line to break, no fleeter to kill, no fleet to scatter that would leave the rest helpless. Every ship that built ships meant that destroying 10 of their ships only delayed the 11th. Every family in every transport meant that this was not a force you could make surrender, because surrender meant the end of their children. And there is no fear in the galaxy stronger than the fear of a parent for a child, and no force stronger than that same parent who has decided the child will live no matter what it costs. They cannot mean to take the whole center, the third voice whispered. It is 40,000 worlds. They are one small world's worth of people. The numbers are nothing. We outnumber them 10,000 to 1. We outnumber them, the fourth voice agreed. And they do not care. That is the part you keep failing to hear. They have always been outnumbered. Their whole history is being outnumbered. Every war they ever fought, every time someone had more. More soldiers, more weapons, more ground. And the ones who survived to make this army, the ones whose children now fly toward us, they are the children of the ones who won anyway. They do not believe in being outnumbered. They have a word for it. We caught the word in their signals. They call it the odds. And they have a saying about the odds. They say the odds are something you beat. The voice came again then, the calm, friendly voice, into the room with no windows. We're going to slow down now, it said. We're close enough. We don't actually want to fight you. I know that's hard to believe given the swarm and all, but the swarm was just to get your attention and clear your guns. We're very good at getting attention. We've been shouting at the dark for a long time, like I said. Mostly nobody listened. You listened. You sent 12 ships to make us stop. So now we're here, and now you have to listen properly, because we're inside your house and your guns can't reach us anymore. What do you want? The first voice said again, and this time the question did not feel strange. We want to talk, the voice said, properly, all the way through, the thing you've never done with anyone. You came to the center of the throne with an army that does not stop and a swarm that broke our guns, the second voice said, and you want to talk. Of course, the voice said. How else would anyone ever take you seriously? You don't talk to the weak. We learned that watching you. We learned everything watching you. You only ever talked to us when you thought we were strong enough to be worth correcting. So we made ourselves worth correcting. We made ourselves impossible to ignore. And now you're listening, and now we can finally have the conversation we wanted to have from the start. There was a silence in the room with no windows. You could have come as friends, the third voice said, and there was something almost like grief in it, the grief of an old thing realizing how it had wasted its long life. You could have come asking. We might have. No, the voice said gently. You wouldn't have. We know you wouldn't have. We've watched you do this 40 times. A young race rises full of hope and reaches out, and you take them or you burn them and you call it correction. We are not your 40th weed. We are the one that watched the other 39 and learned. We came the only way you would ever respect. We came strong. And now that you respect us, we can be kind, because kindness from the strong is the only kind you understand. You taught us that. Every lesson we are about to teach you, you taught us first. The first voice, who had ordered the fleet sent, who had called the blue world a weed, who had never lost, spoke slowly. And if we say no, it said, if we tell you to leave, if we fight. Then we fight, the voice said, and there was no anger in it, no boast, only a flat and dreadful certainty. And we lose ships and you lose worlds, and we lose more ships and you lose more worlds, and it goes on and on because we don't stop. That's the one thing about us you need to understand all the way down to the bottom. We do not stop. You will win 1,000 battles. You will outnumber us in everyone. And at the end of all of it, you will look up and find that you have lost, because winning battles was never the thing. Holding was always the thing. And we are very, very good at holding. The voice paused. But we'd rather talk, it said. We came all this way to talk, so let's talk. And the 9 voices of the throne, the oldest minds of the oldest races, who had decided the fate of 40,000 worlds from a room with no windows, who had never been afraid because they had never had reason, looked at the unbreakable thing that had come into their house and learned, finally, in their last age, how to be the ones who listen. Far out at the edge of the empire, on the blue world, an old woman sat in a small room and watched the same signals everyone watched. She was not a soldier. She had never been to space. Her children were out there in the army in the dark, at the center of everything, and she had not heard their voices in 20 years since they had gone, since the whole world had pooled its strength and emptied its bravest and best into the great long throw at the heart of the power that ruled the stars. She had been a girl when they left. She was old now. She had spent her whole life not knowing if the throw had landed, if her children lived, if the great gamble of her whole world's history had worked, or had simply scattered her people's blood across the dark for nothing. Now the signal came back down the long line, the same line her children had climbed, and it carried a single word, the word the whole world had been waiting 20 years to hear, the word that meant the door was open and held in theirs. The word was through. The old woman put her face in her hands. She did not cry the way you cry for grief. She cried the way you cry when a thing you gave your whole life to and had no right to expect would ever come true, comes true anyway against the odds, the way the odds are meant to be beaten. Her children had reached the center, and the center had listened. In the room with no windows, the first voice spoke, and its voice was the voice of a thing learning to bend after 10 million years of standing straight. Tell us, it said, what you would have us hear. And the calm, friendly, fearless voice of the blue world's children, who had come all this way to talk, began at last to talk. It was not a list of demands. The voices had braced for demands. They knew demands. Demands they could refuse or grant or pretend to grant. This was not that. It was a question. How long, the voice said, since any of you wanted anything, truly wanted it, not order, not obedience, not the empire ticking along the way it always has, something for yourselves, something you'd cross the dark for, something you'd throw everything at and not stop. The room with no windows was silent, because not one of the 9 voices could remember. And in that silence, the first true crack ran through the throne, not from any weapon, not from the swarm or the unbreakable army, but from a question, asked kindly, by a people who had wanted something so badly they had thrown their own children into the dark to reach it. The throne had ruled 40,000 worlds for 10 million years. It had not wanted anything in all that time. The blue world had wanted, and the wanting had carried it to the center of everything. The voices began, slowly, terribly, to understand which of them was actually strong. The talking went on for 9 days. The voices had thought it would be quick. Everything the throne did was quick, in its way, because there was never any doubt about the outcome. The throne decided, and the thing was done. There had been no real conversation in 10 million years, only commands going down and obedience coming up. This was different. This went back and forth. The blue world's people asked, and the voices answered, and the answers led to more questions, and slowly, painfully, like an old joint being worked after long stillness, the throne began to remember how to think instead of only how to decide. The one who spoke for the blue world had a name. The voices had not expected that either. Their own kind had given up names long ago, traded them for purposes. The blue world speaker kept hers. It was Mara. She was not the leader of the army, because the army did not have a leader the way the throne understood leaders. The army made its choices together, in councils, in arguments, in the loud and messy way the blue world did everything. Mara was only the voice they had chosen to send up the line, because she was good at being heard, and because she was not afraid. "You keep asking why we don't just take it," Mara said on the fourth day. "Why we don't seize the center, throw you out, sit in your room and rule the way you ruled. You keep waiting for that. You think that's what strength is for, to take the high seat." "It is what strength has always been for," the first voice said. "That's why you're dying," Mara said, not cruelly, the way a doctor names an illness. "You sat in the high seat so long you forgot there was anything else to do up there. You stopped wanting. A thing that stops wanting stops living. It just takes a long time to notice. 10 million years in your case. You've been dead for most of them. You just had too many worlds holding up the body." The fourth voice, the voice of memory, stirred. "Then what would you have us do?" it said. "If not take the seat. You hold the center, you have the strength. Strength must do something." "Strength should make room," Mara said. The voices did not understand. "You spent 10 million years closing the galaxy," Mara said. "Every young race that rose you took or burned or bent. You made 40,000 worlds into one shape, your shape, the still shape, the shape that doesn't want anything. And the galaxy got quiet. We heard the quiet from our little blue rock at the edge. We heard a whole galaxy full of life all squeezed into one dead shape, and not one voice in all of it calling out except us, shouting into the dark, wondering why nobody answered." "They could not answer," the third voice said. "We did not permit it." "I know," Mara said. "That's the thing we came to change. Not who sits in the seat, what the seat is for. We didn't cross the dark to rule 40,000 worlds. We've got our hands full ruling one badly, the way everybody rules everything badly with a lot of arguing. We came to open the galaxy back up. To make room. To let all those worlds you flatten stand up again and want things and shout into the dark and finally have somebody shout back." On the worlds of the Empire, the news spread the way water spreads when a dam fails. It did not spread because the throne announced it. The throne announced nothing. It spread because the servant traces, who tended the machines and grew the food and built the ships, had been listening too, the way the blue world had taught the whole galaxy to listen by simply refusing to be quiet. They heard that something had come to the center. They heard that the center had not crushed it. They heard, for the first time in 10 million years, the throne doing a thing it had never done. They heard it lose an argument. A small thing. A single argument in a room with no windows against a single small world's stubborn voice. But the servant traces had lived their whole long captivity under the simple iron fact that the throne did not lose, that it could not be argued with. That resistance was not foolish but actually impossible, like arguing with gravity. And now gravity had blinked. On a world called Sethri, where a gentle six-limbed people had served the throne for 100,000 years, grinding metal in the dark, an old worker set down her tools and listened to the signal coming down from the center and did not pick the tools back up. The workers beside her looked at her. She looked back. None of them said anything. None of them needed to. They had all heard the same thing. The throne could lose. If the throne could lose, then everything they had believed about the shape of the world was wrong. And if that was wrong, then maybe the part where they had to grind metal in the dark forever was wrong too. The old worker walked out of the grinding hall. The others followed. By the end of the day, the grinding halls of Sethri were empty, and no one had fired a shot, and the great machines of the throne stood silent for the first time since before the workers' oldest stories began. It happened on Sethri, then it happened on 100 worlds, then 1,000. Not war, not revolt exactly. Something quieter and far more dangerous to a thing like the throne. The world simply stopped. They stopped grinding, stopped growing, stopped building, stopped obeying. They did not raise armies. They did not need to. The throne's strength had always been in the obeying. Take away the obeying, and the throne was a mind in a room with no windows and no hands left to reach with. In the room with no windows, the second voice, the voice of trade, saw the empire coming apart in real time, world by world, and did a strange thing. It laughed. The others turned toward it. A voice laughing was nearly as strange as a voice screaming. "Do you not see it?" the second voice said. "We told ourselves we held them by strength. We held them by their belief in our strength. The belief was the whole empire, not the fleets, not the guns, the belief. And this small, loud world cracked the belief in 9 days, not with weapons, but by simply being a thing we could not crush. Every world that hears we argued with someone and did not win stops believing. And every world that stops believing stops obeying. We are not being conquered. We are being disbelieved. We are coming apart because the galaxy has stopped agreeing to imagine us as it always has." "Then we are finished," the third voice said. "Yes," the second voice said, and there was no fear in it now, which was strange because it sat beside the voice of fear, and the voice of fear was shaking. "The throne is finished. The throne was finished the moment your good commander Drevis opened a channel instead of firing. We have been finished for 9 days and only now noticing, the way we have been dead for 10 million years and only now noticing. The question is no longer whether the throne survives. It does not. The question is what we do in the time we have left, and whether we do it as the thing that crushed 40 worlds or as something else." Mara's voice came into the room, soft now. "That's the first wise thing anyone in that room has said in a long time," she said. "You've been listening. Good. Then listen to this, because it's the offer, the real one, the reason we came all this way to talk instead of fight." The 9 voices listened. "We don't want the seat," Mara said. "I told you that. We can't even sit in it, not really. We're one small world and there's 40,000 of you. The moment we tried to rule you, we'd become you, and we'd rather die than become you, no offense. So here's what we want instead. We want you to do one last thing with all that strength before it's gone. We want you to let go on purpose." "Let go of what?" the first voice said. "Everything," Mara said. "All of it. The whole empire. Don't hand it to us. Don't hand it to anyone. Just open your hands and let it fall open. Take the machines you used to crush the worlds and turn them to building. Take the fleets you used to correct and turn them to carrying food and people and word between worlds that haven't been allowed to speak to each other in 10 million years. Spend the last of your strength making room. Then step down, not because you were beaten. Because you finally wanted to do something, and the thing you wanted to do was the last good thing a dying empire ever gets the chance to do. You undo yourself, on purpose, with dignity, and the galaxy remembers you not as the thing that closed it, but as the thing that opened it again at the end." The room with no windows was silent for a long time. It was the fourth voice, the voice of memory, who finally spoke, because memory more than any of them understood what was being offered. The throne would be remembered. The throne had spent 10 million years ensuring it would be remembered as the master of 40,000 worlds, the still point, the order without end. And it had failed. That memory was already dead, already curdling into something else, the tyrant that fell, the dead thing that fed on the living until a small, loud world finally said no. But there was another memory available, a last one, the one Mara was holding out. "You are offering us a better death," the fourth voice said. "That is what this is. You came across the dark not to kill us. You knew we were already dying. You came to offer us a better way to die than the one we had earned." "Yeah," Mara said simply. "That's exactly what we came to do. We're not monsters. We just had to look like the thing you respected long enough for you to let us in the room. Now we're in the room and we're telling you the truth. You're dying. You've been dying forever. You can die as the thing the whole galaxy spits on, the tyrant that finally fell, or you can die as the thing that, at the very end, with the last of itself, chose to open its hands. Your call. We can't make you. We never could make you do anything, not really. That's the secret. Nobody can make anybody do anything. They just have to believe they can. You believed it about 40,000 worlds for 10 million years. Now stop believing it about yourselves. You get to choose what you are at the end. Almost nobody gets that. We're giving it to you. And in the room with no windows, the 9 voices of the throne, the oldest minds of the oldest races, who had never chosen anything because choosing means there is more than one path and they had only ever seen one, looked for the first time at 2 paths, and understood that they were free, and had always been free, and had thrown that freedom away 10 million years ago and called it order. They had wanted nothing for so long. Now, at the end, with the galaxy coming apart around them and a small, loud world holding the door open, they found, deep in the old dead place where wanting used to live, that they wanted one thing after all. They wanted to be remembered well. It was a small want, a vain one maybe, but it was a want, the first in 10 million years, and it was enough. Tell us how, the first voice said. Tell us how to open our hands. And Mara, the voice of the small, loud world that had crossed the dark, began to teach the throne how to let go. It took longer to take an empire apart with care than it had taken to build one with cruelty. That surprised everyone. It should not have. Cruelty is fast. You break a thing and it stays broken. Care is slow. You have to put each piece down gently in a place where it can stand on its own and check that it will not fall the moment you turn away. The throne had crushed 40,000 worlds in 10 million years. It would take 100 years to set them free without letting them shatter. The throne spent those 100 years. It was the last thing it ever did, and it did it well. The fleets that had patrolled the worlds to keep them obeying turned to carrying instead. They carried food to worlds that had only ever grown one crop, the crop the throne demanded, and now found themselves free and hungry and not knowing how to feed themselves. They carried teachers between worlds that had forgotten how to speak to one another. They carried, most of all, word. The simple word that the galaxy was opening, that the silence was ending, that any world that had a voice could now use it and be answered. The great machines that had built warships turned to building other things. Ships that carried people who wanted to see worlds their grandparents had only heard of in forbidden stories. Stations where the freed races could meet and argue and trade and fall in love, and have all the loud, messy arguments that the blue world had taught the galaxy were the sound of a thing being alive. And the blue world's army, the unbreakable thing that did not stop, stopped. It did not conquer. It did not rule. It did the thing Mara had promised, which was the strangest thing of all to the watching galaxy. It helped. It used its building ships to build, its growing ships to grow, its strength to hold doors open rather than to break them down. The families that had crossed the dark spread out across the freed worlds, not as masters, just as neighbors, the loud, argumentative neighbors who would not stop talking and would not stop wanting, and slowly, by sheer stubborn example, taught a galaxy that had forgotten how to want again. On the world called Sethri, where the gentle six-limbed people had walked out of the grinding halls, the old worker who had set down her tools first lived to see something she had no word for because her people had never had one. She lived to see her grandchildren choose what to do with a day, choose what to make, choose where to go, small choices, the smallest choices, the kind the blue world's children made 1,000 times a day without thinking. To the old worker, they were the largest things in the universe, and she watched her grandchildren make them, and she wept the way you weep when a thing you never dared hope for arrives anyway. Commander Drevis, who had opened the channel, who had talked to a weed instead of burning it, lived a long time too. The blue world had kept its word. He was fine, more than fine. He became, in his old age, a kind of teacher, going from world to world to tell the story of the day he broke 10 million years of habit by simply choosing to talk first. Young races, newly freed, hungry to understand how the long silence had broken, would gather to hear him. "Why did you do it?" they always asked. "You were sent to burn them, you had the order, why did you talk?" And Drevis, who had thought about it for the rest of his life and never been fully sure, would give the only answer he had. "Because they were shouting," he would say. "The whole galaxy was quiet and they were shouting into the dark, and I had spent my whole life in the quiet, and I was so tired of it that when I finally heard a voice that wasn't afraid, I wanted to hear what it had to say. That's all. That's the whole reason the galaxy is free." One tired old soldier wanted to hear a voice. You'd think it would take more than that. It never does. It only ever takes one person, somewhere in the chain, choosing to listen instead of to crush. The 9 voices of the throne lived to see most of the 100 years. They did not live to see all of them. A mind that has been dying for 10 million years cannot be kept alive forever, even by a sudden late discovery of the will to live. One by one, as their work finished, as the worlds they had set free learned to stand, the voices let themselves go. They had wanted one thing at the end, to be remembered well, and they had earned it, and a thing that has earned the only thing it ever wanted does not need to hold on. The third voice went first, the voice of fear, which had panicked when the swarm broke the guns and had screamed in a room where no one had ever screamed. It went quietly in the end, all its fear spent, having learned the thing that fear exists to teach and is so rarely allowed to teach, which is that the thing you are afraid of is sometimes the thing that saves you. The first voice went last, the voice of war, which had called the blue world a weed and sent 12 ships to correct it. It held on the longest because it had the most to undo, and it would not let itself go until the last fleet it had ever commanded had finished carrying the last load of food to the last hungry world. Then its strength finally spent on building instead of breaking. It spoke one last time, to Mara, who had stayed in contact across all the long years, who had become something like a friend to the dying thing she had come across the dark to unmake. "You said we taught you every lesson you taught us," the first voice said. Its voice was very faint now. "You said you only learned to be kind because we taught you that kindness from the strong is the only kind we understand. I have thought about that for 100 years. I do not think it is true. I think you were always going to be kind. I think you only told us we taught you so that we would not feel we had taught the galaxy nothing but cruelty. I think your last kindness to us was a lie, and the kindest lie ever told." Myra was old by then too. The girl who had crossed the dark was a grandmother now, on a freed world a long way from the blue rock where she had been born. She took a long time to answer. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe you did teach us and the kindness was always in us and both things are true at once, the way most true things come in pairs. Does it matter? You did the good thing at the end. That's the part that's real. That's the part the galaxy keeps. Everything before it, the 10 million years, all the worlds you crushed, that's real too. We don't pretend it isn't. The freed worlds will tell that story for as long as there are worlds. But they'll tell the other story too. The one where the thing that closed the galaxy chose at the very end with its last strength to open it again. Both stories. Forever. That's more than most things get. Most things only get the one story, and it's usually not the kind one." "Was it worth it?" the first voice asked. "Your world threw its children into the dark. You did not see your own mother again. You crossed everything, risked everything, on the chance that we would listen instead of burn. If your good fortune had run the other way, if I had given the order to fire at your blue world instead of talking, your whole people's gamble would have ended in ash. Was it worth the risk?" And Mara, the grandmother on the freed world under the strange suns, looked out at a galaxy full of voices, full of argument, full of want, full of all the loud, messy noise of life that her people had spent 20 years and everything they had to set loose. And she gave the answer that the blue world had always given, the answer it had learned in its own mud, in its own endless wars, the answer that had carried it across the dark to the center of everything. "The odds," she said, "are something you beat." Far away, on the blue world, the long silence had a name now in 100 new languages, and the breaking of it had a name too, and the names were taught to children on 40,000 worlds. And somewhere in the deep dark between the stars, the small ugly square scoutship that had started all of it, the one that Veller the watchman had caught at the edge of Korun space and almost not reported, the one with the strange letters on its hull that no archive held, drifted now in honored stillness at the center of everything, kept and tended. A monument to the day, a quiet galaxy heard a voice that was not afraid. The letters on its hull, which no archive had held, which had terrified an empire that could not name them, were finally read aloud at the monument's dedication. In the trade tongue the whole galaxy now shared freely. They were not a threat, they were not a banner, they were not the name of an army. They were 4 small words, the words the blue world had painted on the first thing it ever sent into the dark, the words that were the whole of its hope, and the whole of its history, and the whole of the reason the galaxy was free. The words said, "We are still here." And the galaxy, loud and free and full of want, answered back across the dark, in 100,000 voices, the way the blue world had always longed to be answered, the way it had shouted into the silence for so long without reply. "We hear you," the galaxy said. "We hear you, we are here too. You are not alone anymore." And the small ship drifted, and the suns of the center burned, and the empire that had terrified everyone was gone, and the thing that had replaced it had no throne and no master and no still point, only 40,000 worlds full of voices, all of them talking at once, all of them alive, all of them at last unafraid.